You ever have one of those nightmares where you're trapped in some bizarre, illogical situation and you just can't wake up? Well, you might have been living in a Kafka story. Today, we're going to decode the man who literally gave us a word for our deepest modern anxieties, Franz Kafka. Let's peel back the layers and find out why his world feels so, well, so creepily familiar.
So let's start with the big one. What is Kafka-esque? I mean, we throw that term around for everything from being stuck on hold with customer service to any kind of weird legal trouble. But what does it really mean? What is the secret sauce behind that specific, illogical dread?
To get it, we really have to start with his most famous story, the Metamorphosis. The opening line is one of the greatest of all time. A traveling salesman named Gregor Samsa wakes up one morning and finds he's turned into a monstrous insect. But here's the crazy part. He's not totally horrified that he's a giant bug. He's stressed out that he's going to be late for work. And that right there is our front door into the Kafkaesque, a completely bizarre tragedy that's met with the most mundane, everyday anxiety.
But you gotta understand, this surreal world he creates isn't just random weirdness for the sake of it. No, it's a landscape that's carefully built from some really profound philosophical ideas that were just starting to bubble up in the 20th century. Kafka was basically channeling the anxieties of his time, and, as we're about to see, our time too.
Okay, first up in our toolkit, absurdity. The philosopher Albert Camus pointed out that Kafka was the absolute master of this. You know that feeling when you're just desperate for things to make sense, for a reason why something is happening, but the universe just stares back at you completely silent? That's the absurd. Why did Gregor turn into an insect? The story never tells us. It just is. And that conflict, our human need for logic clashing with a world that offers none, that's the heart of it all.
And then there's alienation. I mean, think about it. Even before he became a bug, Gregor was just a cog in a machine. He was a salesman who was only valued for the money he brought in. The second he can't work anymore, he's worthless. He becomes a stranger in his own home. He's alienated from his body, from his family, from his entire identity. It's that all-too-modern feeling of sitting in an office cubicle or scrolling through your phone and feeling completely and utterly disconnected from who you really are.
And finally, we get to this idea that the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre called bad faith. Now, it sounds complicated, but Kafka makes it really simple. Even as a giant insect, Gregor's main worry is about his family's finances. He's clinging to his old role as the provider, a role that has literally crushed him. He is actively choosing the familiar prison of his old duties over the terrifying freedom of his new reality. And that's bad faith in a nutshell. Pretending you're not free so you don't have to escape the roles that are defining and destroying you.
So, you might be asking, where did all these intense feelings of absurdity, alienation, and guilt even come from? Well, for Franz Kafka, the answer starts where it so often does, at home. You see, his art was born from a really deep and painful personal trauma.
The single most defining relationship of Kafka's entire life was with his father, Hermann, and it wasn't a good one. It was a source of constant psychological pressure, this tyranny. His father's overbearing, dismissive personality basically became the blueprint for all of the oppressive, unseen authorities that show up in his stories later on.
This relentless pressure from his dad created this constant hum of guilt, insecurity, and fear inside Kafka's mind. Can you imagine feeling like you are just fundamentally wrong, no matter what you do? This wasn't just a case of being sad. This was the raw material for his art. This deep, personal feeling of being judged by an impossible standard is exactly what fuels the absurd trials and the senseless punishments in his books.
And you don't have to look any further than his masterpiece, The Trial. It starts with a man who is arrested one morning. What's his crime? He has no idea. Who is his accuser? He never gets to meet them. This faceless, all-powerful punishing system, it's a direct literary projection of his father. Kafka took the very specific terror of his own childhood and somehow managed to turn it into a universal myth about modern power.
And Kafka didn't just invent new myths out of thin air. He channeled all these anxieties by reaching way back into the past, taking these ancient Greek myths and just twisting them, turning them inside out, to reflect the hollow, absurd reality of the world he was living in.
Let's take the story of Odysseus and the Sirens. You know, in Homer's epic, the hero cleverly has his men tie him to the mast so he can hear their beautiful, deadly song without crashing his ship. Smart guy. But in Kafka's version, Odysseus plugs his ears with wax, and it turns out the Sirens' deadliest weapon isn't their song at all, it's their silence. So Odysseus sails right by, feeling all smug, thinking he outsmarted them, but he was completely oblivious to the real test. It's just this perfect, brutal parody of modern man's misplaced faith in his own genius.
And he does the same exact thing with Prometheus, the Titan who is punished for giving fire to humans.
The original Greek myth is this epic story of heroic sacrifice that ends in forgiveness, while Kafka just drains all the meaning out of it. In his version, everyone forgets why Prometheus is even being punished. The gods forget, the eagles forget, even Prometheus himself forgets. His suffering just becomes this pointless, eternal chore until he literally just fuses with the rock he's chained to. It's heroism turned into absurd, bureaucratic paperwork.
And this one is just brilliant because it so perfectly illustrates his critique of bureaucracy. He takes the mighty Greek god Poseidon, the ruler of the seas, and transforms him into a modern civil servant. He's stuck at his desk at the bottom of the ocean, just endlessly filing paperwork for an empire he's never actually seen. He's bored, he's alienated, and he's always putting off any real exploration. The all-powerful god has become a powerless paper pusher. Sound familiar? Okay, so given this whole world of anxiety and alienation and despair, it's really easy to see Kafka as just this figure of darkness. But the final chapter of his life reveals a really surprising and ultimately heartbreaking twist in the story.
You see, his relationships were just as tormented as his writing. He was engaged multiple times, but every single time, his insecurity and these deep feelings of guilt, all fueled by his father's constant disapproval, caused him to break it off. Love always seemed to be just out of his reach.
But then, at the very end of his life, when he was already very sick with tuberculosis, everything changed. He met Dora Diamond, a young woman who was independent and kind, and she just understood him in a way that it seems no one else ever had.
And with Dora, he finally found the happiness that had escaped him his entire life. His close friend Max Brod would later write this beautiful tribute which was eventually put on Dora's tombstone. For the very first time, it seems, Kafka experienced a love that was free from guilt and fear.
For one blissful year, Kafka really lived. He finally moved out of his parents' house. He and Dora dreamed of a future together in Palestine, where they wanted to open a restaurant. She would cook, and he would be the waiter. And Dora's descriptions of him from this time are just shocking. She called him cheerful, playful, someone who loved mischief. This was a completely different Kafka, a man who was capable of deep love and joy and hope.
But this final happy chapter doesn't erase all the darkness that came before. If anything, it sharpens it. This glimpse of joy makes the tragedy of his life so much more profound. He finally found an escape route, a way to be truly human, only to have it snatched away from him by time. He died in Dora's arms, having known real love for just 1 year.
So how do all of these pieces, the philosophy, the trauma, the myths, and that final fleeting love, how do they all come together? Why, a century after his death, does Kafka feel more relevant now than maybe ever before? Well, now we can see that Kafkaesque isn't just a fancy synonym for bizarre or weird. It's a very precise cocktail of feelings, a recipe that perfectly captures our modern anxieties. It's that specific dread of living in a world that doesn't seem to have any built-in purpose. It's the psychological weight of being controlled by these huge oppressive systems, whether they're familial, corporate, or governmental, that just operate without any clear logic. It's what the political thinker Hannah Arendt called the rule of nobody, a bureaucracy so vast no single person is actually responsible. And maybe above all, it's that profound sense of alienation from our work, from our world, and even from our own selves. And so that's what we're left with. Kafka diagnosed our modern condition 100 years ago. We are all, in our own ways, navigating our own faceless bureaucracies, searching for meaning in a world that often seems completely indifferent. His work isn't just a warning, it's a mirror. And it leaves us with one pretty haunting question. In a world that is constantly pressuring you to become just another cog in the machine, how will you avoid your own metamorphosis?